wish I could sit in this P-robe. Are you already filming? I wish I could sit in this P-robe. So, this is such a treasure. Douglas started filming before I could really come over and take a look. I hardly ever get to see George's magnificent Mamou Riding Academy of 1971. I am sharing this with you from within the Cabildo on Jackson Square in New Orleans in the French Quarter, where the Louisiana State Museum is hosting Rodrigue before the Blue Dog. 1971 is a pivotal year for George because that is the year of his aioli dinner. You can see the original of that, by the way, at any time over at the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, also here in New Orleans. And so that was the painting that George considered his first real painting of people, the aioli dinner, and the painting that defined his style. And once he figured that out, he got very excited and started exploring that within all of his canvases. So what am I talking about here? Well, a few things. We've got our trees. This is how he is defining his style by this time. These massive, large oaks. And instead of painting Louisiana in a European style, which was very popular at the time and had been for, well, since the beginning of people painting Louisiana, which would mean big skies and the land down low, George instead really transformed American landscape painting. He took his oak tree, his symbol of Louisiana, pushed it to the front of his canvas, cut it off at the top so that the sky would become small and so that it would be as if all of us looking at the painting are actually under the tree and are able to enter the scene. If the sky is small, then that means that there's an opportunity for contrast of light versus dark in the bright light sky versus what George called his black oaks. And George loved symbolism. He described this light as hope, specifically the hope of the Cajun people following Le Grand Rangement in 1755, the persecution and expulsion of the Cajun people by the British. When they traveled to, most of the time by foot, to South Louisiana. In George's case, he was descended from 4 Rodrigue brothers who made that journey. And so that history was very important to him, as it is to all Cajun people, and as histories are important to all of us, right? The journey of our people and how did we get here. So George was very much thinking about that. He thought about the oak tree not only as being a symbol of Louisiana, but also as something that kind of locked the people into the area of South Louisiana, the Cajun people, became a barrier from the rest of the country, yes? And how is he going to depict that? Well, he's going to lock his people into the land. George painted nothing but oak tree, ground, and sky for the first 3 years after he returned from art school in California, the Art Center College of Design, where he was in the late 1960s. But he said about 3 years in that one day he wondered what would a person look like who walked out from behind one of his trees, and he decided it would be something like this, that they would be very primitive looking because they're outside. George was not a big painter of interiors. He also was not a plein air painter. He was not set up outside painting this. He fabricated his scenes to a point. What George would do oftentimes is find photographs and then interpret them into his own imaginary world. So in this case, he actually found this photograph in a junk shop in Lafayette, Louisiana. He thought it was a really cool photograph, and he adapted it to a South Louisiana landscape. When I say a photograph, I mean a photograph of these actual figures. So how did he do that? Well, he re-photographed the photograph and made a slide of it, put it on an overhead projector, and then chose his canvas size, moved that projector back and forth until he projected the figures, which would have been like a blurry mass, right, onto the canvas. And then he would have done a loose outline all the way around these figures, pulled that projector away, and then literally designed his landscape around them so that the figures would have the illusion of being, well, as he put it, cut out of Canada and pasted onto South Louisiana. Their heads never touch the sky. All of George's Cajun paintings can be explained this way. They are literally locked into a landscape all the way through. You can see that all the way through of George's design. Now, when George did this painting, he got into a bit of trouble because this painting is in his book, The Cajuns of George Rodrigue, which was published by Oxmoor House out of Birmingham, Alabama. They're the publisher of Southern Living magazine in 1976. And for that book, George wrote all of the text. The text is written, he wrote it in English, and he had a French translator to put the French just alongside it. And for this particular painting, he tells a story of a German mule trader in Mamou, Louisiana, and that the mule trader was down to his last little white mule, and he meets this young girl who's very excited about it, convinces her father to buy it, and before you know it, all of the girls in the town wanted these white mules, and the mule trader was back in business. He sets them up here and calls it the Mamou Riding Academy on the 4th of July. But none of that was true. He made it all up. The true story is the one I told you previously about the photograph of an anonymous place in a junk shop. He didn't know where it was from. So when I asked George about this painting, he said to me that he got in big trouble as a young man in his 20s because the mayor of Mamou was upset because there was no such thing as the Mamou Riding Academy. There was no such thing as all these little girls on their white mules on the 4th of July. None of this existed. And it was Jimmy DiMaggio, some of you may have heard of him. He did a lot to support the Cajun language, and particularly the French language, and French culture, French Cajun culture here in Louisiana. He was the founder and president of the council, I believe founder, definitely president, for the Council on the Development of the French Language in Louisiana. He was responsible for bringing all of these French teachers here on exchange programs and teaching the French. And he was the one who went to the mayor of Mamou and diffused the situation and explained that actually George Rodrigue, through his book, through his paintings, the book went on to become an official gift of state during the Carter White House. It was recognized by the Louisiana Endowment for the Arts. It received all kinds of awards, and through these things, DiMaggio explained to the mayor, George actually did a lot to propel the Cajun culture into a wider mainstream perspective, into something that more people were curious about, more people wanted to know about, and more people gained respect for. Yeah? So through things like this, George helped to, in some ways, preserve a culture that he feared was dying away. George would say that he was painting in such a way that he was graphically interpreting the Cajun culture. It's a fabulous painting, very rarely on view. Please come and see it at the Cabildo Louisiana State Museum during Rodrigue Before the Blue Dog through September of 2024.